theyeshiva.net.
Pesachim Kuf Tazayin Amud Aleph, right? On the bottom, after the Mishnah. It's an interesting thing to point out how sometimes a mistake, or at least what some people thought was a mistake, created such an interesting commotion in halacha. Okay. We learned yesterday about the charoises. Kuf Tazayin, Amarav deals with the charoises. If it's a mitzvah, if it's just because of poison, and if it's a mitzvah, what's the mitzvah? Is it for the apple? Is it for the clay? Reb Levi, Reb Yochanan. And the Brisa says you have to mix in some spices, tavelin, which look like straw. They look a little bit like straw. Zecher leteven. And Rebbe Elazar ben Tzadok said that the window vendors in Jerusalem used to call it a mitzvah. They used to say, come buy spices for a mitzvah and so forth. I just want to point out here, one of the Rashbams, if you'll take a look at the Rashbam, Tavlin. You see Tavlin? It's right before the Mishnah. Right before the Mishnah of Ekana ben Shoyel. You see, there's the Rashbam Tavlin. The Gemara says that you have to put in Tavlin into the charoises. Tavlin means spices. Like some people would put in ginger, some people would put in cinnamon. In later generations, a lot of people don't use these things, but that's what's brought in the Poskim. So you see the Rashbam says Tavlin, Psamim shematilin becharoises, Zecher leteven. Spices that they put into the charoises to commemorate the straw, which the Jews had to collect in order to form the bricks which they used for the construction of the edifices of Parai. And then the Rashbam adds, V'cheres shekoichin by hadek zecher letit. What does the word cheres mean, you know? Cheres, clay cheres is called pottery made of earthenware. Basically, you take mud, you take earth, you mix it with water, and you mold it. You ever see how they make earthenware pottery? You mold it, and you bake it in an oven or under the sun, and that's called clay cheres. Cheres means earthenware. It's shards of earthenware. So when you read the Rashbam, he says, v'cheres, you put in spices, v'cheres, you take earthenware, cheres, basically shards, pottery shards, shekoichin by hadek, which you grind well, like it says by the Ketores, they grind it well. Hadek means very, very dak, very, very thin. Zecher letit, at a zecher fetit. When you read this Rashbam, what else do you have to put in the charoises besides food? You got to put in cheres. You got to basically put in earthenware pottery, grind it up very, very well, because you don't want to eat. You don't want to eat mud, but grind it up very well, and that's the tit. That's what they use. That's part of what you use as the mortar, as the clay to build the Pisim and Ramses. That's how you could touch in the Rashbam here, that they put it in zecher v'cheres shekoichin behadek zecher letit.
That could be a mistake, because he probably meant to say.
So one of the Rishonim, the Shibbolei Haleket, in Simon Reishut Ches, he writes, based on this Rashbam, that as a result of this, there became a minig that people would take a little clay or take a brick and grind it up very, very well and put it into the charoises, zecher letit. Okay, the Beis David in Simon Reishut and Gimel writes that in Saloniki was a very big Jewish community that's in Greece. Saloniki, Greece. He says the elders of Saloniki testified that they always put into the charoises, they had a rock, they would grind up a rock, they had a special rock, they would grind it up and they would put that into the charoises, a little bit rock, based on this. Comes the Birkei Yosef, the Chidah, the Birkei Yosef in Chaim in Hilchas Pesach, and he says as follows, that there was one of the Mekabolim was known as Maharam Dilun Zano. He writes on this Shibbolei Haleket that you put in some clay or some bricks. He says like this: Nivhalti mereois shigoyin kazeh. I was astounded from seeing this craziness, this meshagas. Ulai gam bepurim yoitziu mehem dam zeichel gzeres hariga. Maybe on Purim we should start extracting blood in order to commemorate all the Persian anti-Semites who were slain. Our job is to transform the mourning into joy and the negativity into positivity. We don't celebrate with blood on Purim, and we don't celebrate with clay and cement and mortar on Pesach. And therefore, the Birkei Yosef says that this minig was created based on the Rashbam. However, the Rashbam was written without a printing press. There was no word processor. It was written in handwriting. And the one who copied the manuscript made a mistake. Instead of v'cheres, it really said v'charoisus. It said charoisus, and he turned it into cheres. Now, I'm saying it could have been the Rashbam wrote cheres, and on the samach he put an apostrophe not to finish the word. Or maybe he finished the word, but the person didn't see it. So cheroisus became cheres. So he says, really what the Rashbam meant was, v'charoisus shekoitchen by hatev zeichelatit. The charoisus you have to grind up well. You don't eat whole apples. You don't need whole pears. You don't need whole walnuts. You grind it. You don't need whole. You grind it up. You grind up the charoisus into, it's not mamash a liquid, but it's close to a liquid. You put in wine, etc. And the word charoisus was exchanged with the word cheres. That's why today in most Rashbams, probably in your Gemara also, they have on the word cheres a note, yeah? Do they have a letter on it where they correct it and they say that it has to be charoisus. And the truth is that he is absolutely right. How do I know he's absolutely right? Because if you look in Rashi, Rashi was the grandfather of the Rashbam. That's on top. The same Tavlin. On Tavlin, Rashi says, Yerokas shematilin b'charoisus eichel teven, v'charoisus shekoitshim b'hodek zeichel tit. Rashi, he's quoting his grandfather verbatim. So to say that the Rashbam was quoting him verbatim and he changed one word from charoisus to cheres would not be logical. So this was pushed a mistake. But it's fascinating that Lepoil, this minig became, they would put in earthenware or mud or bricks or rock into their charoisus, grind it up very, very thin. I wanted to make a comment because it's just interesting how that word generated a whole discussion.
Even though it's a one word change, how could they not see the Rashi?
They may have seen the Rashi, but they thought that the Rashbam was saying something new.
No, he is actually specifying Rashi because he said Rashi says Yerokas and he says B'samim.
That's true. He changes from Yerokas to Psamim. That's true. That's true. He does make a change. So perhaps they thought there was a second change. I'm just saying from Rashi's Lashon is a very strong, I can't say it's 100%, but it's a very strong source to say that the Rashbam really wrote charoisus and somebody made a mistake.
We wouldn't fix it even though we know for sure.
I guess, but he said it's a loy shamati nivhalti mirois shigoyin kaza.
It's not changed within the Rashbam itself ever, even though we know it's clearly a mistake.
Yeah, and we should say that Shibale Haleket was one of the Rishonim. So it's just, but he attacks it so heavily. Nivhalti, how can you say such a thing?
How does the Shibboleth Halakha deal with the concept that you don't change a minute even if it's, we don't see a basis for it, we think it's a mistake?
So that's what he believes. He believes that it was completely misguided. Like,
how does he look at Minhagim, not him in particular? How do the earliest?
Well, I think we often make a mistake. The value of a minig is that it has a basis. If it's a meshagas, it's not a minig, it's a meshagas. But it has to be a...
So, in other words, how do you have the sources? Is that what?
Yeah.
And if the source is meaningless,
yeah,
then it's not a minig.
It's not a minig, yeah. Let's face it, sometimes people are OCD. And any type thing that they hear, even if they heard wrong, it becomes a minig. And you know, and sometimes the whole family suffers from it. And there's no need for it. It's not a minig. Yeah. Taisvus has a lashon minig avosenu toirahi. Minig Yisrael toirahu. It says in a lot of poskim. A minig is called Torah. That's the menachas. Yeah. And then there's an expression already in the old generations. Minig ois gehenim. Minig is the letters of Gehenim. So somebody once asked, when do you say it's a Torah, when do you say it's Gehenim? I said, it's Pasha. If it's my minig, it's Torah. If it's your minig, it's Gehenim. Yeah, that's what a lot of people think. If it's my minig, then it's Torah. If it's your minig, then it's craziness. It's Gehenim. But the real point is that there's two types of minhagim. There's a minhag that's rooted in truth. It's a minhag. It's not a halacha, you don't have to, but it's a minhag. And then there's a minhag that's rooted in fantasy, in hallucinations, in some person's obsessions, in a wrong interpretation. So that's like, it just creates Gehenna for everybody. Just creates Gehenna for everybody. Then there's another issue, and another issue is that sometimes there's a minhag that's an authentic minhag, but the people are not ready for that minhag. Right? And then you also have to understand that's not minhag osis Gehenna, but it means that sometimes you want to win the battle and you lose the war.
I'm an abolish thing sometimes.
Yeah, in other words, you have to understand. In other words, if a minhag is very, very precious, but the point of a minhag was, the idea of a minhag by the Jewish people is like, you buy your wife roses on Erev Shabbos, right? What's the idea? It's a gesture. You do it 4 weeks, and then the 5th week you don't bring roses, and you're dead. But the whole idea of it is, it's a gesture. It's a gift. It's not an obligation. It's a gift. The moment it becomes just a fixed duty that's dry and monotonous, it loses its whole purpose. The idea of minhagim is that Jews were displaying their romance, their affection, their special relationship. The idea of a minhag, when you say, I do a minhag miserably, it's a contradiction in terms. It's like, I brought flowers and I cursed when I gave the flowers. Like, take your flowers and throw it in the garbage. You understand? The whole idea is you're trying to show a love, a special sensitivity. So when the minhag becomes the cause of anxiety and stress, it's the whole opposite of what a minhag is. What do you need a minhag for? The whole idea of a minhag is you're going the extra mile, right? You don't have to do it. That's the point. It's not a mitzvah. It's a minhag. A minhag means you don't have to. So why are you doing it? And the answer is because the Jewish people wanted to show their affection. I'm going the extra mile. I'm doing something special. So it's a sense of specialness. There's a joy there. If it's just causing anxiety and stress, you have to, something is off here. You have to explain to people what the minhag is, what the point of it is. So I think that's just a general observation. I'm not saying we should abolish every minhag that a child in the house doesn't like. What I'm saying is our attitude towards minhagim always has to be one of celebration and positivity, not one of more stress and anxiety. And in different situations, you have to judge, what's appropriate, and you have to monitor, because you don't want to be right and lose the person. It's extremely important. I know. It's
That drives everybody nuts.
Right.
Sometimes a minhag is something happened that have fellowship fish by a fisherman.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's true. But this is a very interesting thing. This was a minhag from the Rishonim and Saloniki, right? Comes the Birkei Yosef and he quotes the Makubal, Maram di Lunzano, who calls it Marish Shigoyin. This is an act of craziness. Who is he saying this about? But his point was that it has absolutely no basis and you should not be doing this. We don't need cement on Pesach.
It wasn't a mitzvah. It wasn't a minhag of Klal Yisrael. It was a minhag just in
Of Saloniki. That's one place, but the Shibali Halekhet also brings it. Okay.
So they still do it today.
No,
A minhag never is broken.
In Saloniki today is a very... The community of Saloniki was wiped out by the Holocaust. I don't know. You have Jews, but not. Okay, Zog the Gemara. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught. After the Mishnah goes through what we do with the second cup, we pour the second cup, and the child asks the questions, and he goes through the Manashtan, and you begin with disgrace, and you end with praise, and you darshan the whole pasuk of Aram, the whole section of Arami, Ovid Avi, and Parshas Kisavai. So the Gemara says as follows: Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught in a brayso. Chacham b'nai, if the child is a chacham, he has perception and is wise, then shayaloi, then the child asks the questions of his father, as the Mishnah says. V'meini chacham. What if he doesn't have this sufficient knowledge or wisdom to ask? Ishtay shayaltoi. Then the person's wife should ask the questions, which is a fascinating brisa, because the Mishnah said that if the child has his own das, he asks his own questions. If not, his father teaches him to ask. But that's talking about still a child who you could teach. You could teach him to ask the manishtana, and he'll understand what you're teaching him. He's not going to ask it on his own, but if you teach it to him, he'll ask the question. Now the brisa is talking about a child, not only does he not ask on his own, you can't even teach him to ask. In other words, it's not going to work. That's stage 3. There's stage 1, he'll ask himself. Stage 2, you could teach him and educate him. Aviv malamdoi, to ask. And this is stage 3 in the brisa, that he doesn't even have that ability to ask, even if you teach him. So now the brisa says something new, that what there should always be an exchange of questions and answers, and therefore his wife asks the question. V'im lav, what happens if he doesn't have a wife? So he doesn't have her to ask the questions? He's himself. Hu shayla atzmai. He asks himself the question. Because the mitzvah of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim has to happen always through question and answer. Shaila and Shuva. And this is rooted in Chumash. It says, V'haya ki yish'olcha vincha machar. When your child asks you, you should answer. So therefore, if you have nobody to ask the question, ask yourself the question, manishtana, so that this tradition is preserved. You'll say, but you're asking yourself and you're answering. So if you're answering, what do you have to ask? The idea of a question is somebody asks me because he doesn't know, and then I answer him because I do know. But if I'm asking myself the question, nonetheless, there has to be the question, the curiosity, and then the answer.
Yes. Does he have to articulate it? Does he have to verbalize it?
Yeah, he actually asks. Manishtana laylaza. Yeah, I want to ask myself 4 questions. Manishtana laylaza mikola laylas. And you go through the question, and then you say, now let me answer. It's a fascinating halacha.
We said yesterday that if you know the answer, you're not mechuyev to ask.
Say it.
Huh?
We said yesterday that if you know the answer, you understand it all. You don't know. I know Kamala Chacham, but you said that you're not mechuyev to ask.
No, we learned 2 shittas. There's a shitta of Rashi and the Rashbam, and the shitta of Toys. The shitta of Rashi and the Rashbam is that if the child asks any question, you could skip the manishtana. You could just go to Avodah Mayinu. As long as he asked a question. For example, why are we pouring the second cup? Now, and then there's a shitta of Toysvus who says, no, the manishtana is, the Chachamim fixed the question, that should be asked. Even if he asks other questions. Yes, that's what we see here. And even if it's 2 Talmidei Chachamim, great Torah scholars who know all the halachas of Pesach, Shoyalin zelazeh, they ask each other the question. In other words, don't think it's only for the children or those who are children intellectually to teach them what they don't know, and therefore he who knows doesn't have to tell the story and certainly doesn't have to ask questions. No. They have to tell the story to each other, and they have to ask questions from each other. And that's what we say in the beginning of the Haggadah. Afilu kolano chachamim, kolano nevoinim, kolano yodim esatayra. Mitzvah leinu l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim. So one asks the manishtana, and the other Talmud Chacham answers the manishtana.
So if we have a Talmud Chacham sitting at your table and a wife, who should I?
Seems like the wife comes first. That's where the wife comes first.
The Nesiv Shalom says something beautiful, which is that if the Tati is a shtickle amaretz, and he has great sons that are big Rebbeim and Dayanim and Talmidei Chachamim, still the Tati has to tell the story to the sons, because that's the way the Emor.
Father to child. Father has to tell it to the child. The Mishnah said, Manishtana layla zemikol alaylas shebechol alaylas. This was the girsa, the text the Gemara had. What's the difference between this night to all the other nights? The first question is, all the nights we dip once, and tonight we dip twice. Asks the Gemara, Maskif larav, I don't understand. Atu kol yoyma lo sagad lo matbel echad azimna. Every day, is it not good if a person doesn't dip even once? There's no obligation to dip once every night of the year. What does it mean? B'chol haleilas anu matbilin pa'amachas. Is it really insufficient if you don't dip once every night? There's no such an obligation. I mean, you could. When we asked it's not a question. It doesn't mean you have to eat vegetables every night. It just means you don't have to search for morer every night. Tonight you have to search for morer. So it doesn't mean that you have to eat vegetables every other night. It just means you don't have to search for morer. You can eat any vegetable you want. But when you say here, we dip once, it sounds like every single night we dip once. Where do you have a tradition or a custom or an obligation that every night you have to dip once? You don't have to dip anything any night. That's the question. So the Gemara says, Ela Marava, wrong text. Hachi Katani. This is how the Mishnah has to read. All nights we're not obligated to dip even once. And tonight twice, the karpas in the dip, and the morer in the charoisis, it's 2 dips. Maskeflo Reb Safra questioned this text as well, because it sounds like we have to. The first dip, which is just done for the children, you're calling a chiyuv? In other words, a chiyuv means what we call an absolute obligation. The second dip, we have to eat maror. There's a mitzvah to eat maror, so it's called a chiyuv. And there's a mitzvah to dip the maror in charoisis, however you explain the charoisis. So that you could call a chiyuv. But the first dip, even though the Chachamim wanted it to happen, you can't call it a chiyuv. It's like an obligation. It was just to trigger the curiosity of the children. So that's what he's saying. Chiyuv l'dardiki? Are you calling this a chiyuv when it's really only made to trigger the curiosity of the children? This is how it has to read. He takes out the word chayavin. All nights of the year we don't dip even once. And tonight we dip twice. He doesn't use the word einanu chayavin afilu pa'amachas alayla zeh shtei pamim. And that's indeed the text that we say today at the Seder. Right? As Reb Safra did it. Now the truth is, in the time of the Mishnah, they used to eat everything through dipping. That was the way of eating. They would take their food and dip it. But they would not eat vegetables before the meal. Once you washed and you sat down to eat bread, you ate vegetables. To eat vegetables before the meal, like we do by the Seder, was completely uncharacteristic. That's what the child is saying. A whole year, they used to always dip. The answer is, but in the middle of the meal. They wouldn't dip once before the meal. Right? This first dip that we have, they didn't have because they wouldn't dip any time before the meal. That's what he means. But halayla hazeh, we dip twice, and both times is before the main meal. The first time it's even before we wash, and the second time is after we eat the matzah, but before we eat the meal, because it's before Shulchan Aruch. That's what the Rishonim clarify. Maschel bignus.
Is it a strange question that child should ask this when they didn't reach the second dip?
You're saying, how does a child know that we dip twice? Because he was taught that we're going to dip twice.
Why is he asking the question? He knows already. I mean,
Well, it's not a frequent when during the year.
Well, the Mishnah says that his father taught him the question. So he taught him that we're going to dip maror and charaisa. So he asks that. Maschel b'gnusa masayim b'shvach. The Mishnah says the structure of the Haggadah is you begin with disgrace and you end with praise. You begin with the darkness and you end with the light. Frag the Gemara, my bignus. What does this mean, you begin bignus? Rava Marav says, Mitchila oivdei avodas gilulim hayu aveseinu. That's how you begin. You begin telling the story that our forefathers were steeped in avodas gilulim, in idolatry. Va'achshav, and then now kervanu hamakam la'avodase. Hashem brought us to serving Him. Because Terach, our great-great-great-great-grandfather, the father of Avraham Avinu, was steeped in idolatry. And even Avraham Avinu, as a child, as a baby, followed the tradition and the upbringing of his father until Avraham Avinu on his own discovered the truth of God, the truth of monotheism. So even Avraham Avinu, in the beginning of his life, there's different opinions in Chazal when he recognized by the The Rambam says when he was 40, some places says 48, some places say 3. But the point is, even Avram Avinu was steeped in the Avodah Zarah of his father Terach. So that's what it means, maschil bignus. We begin with the primitiveness, with the time that our forefathers were steeped in darkness and primitiveness and superstition and paganism. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Avodim hayinu lefarim b'Mitzrayim. The gnus doesn't refer to the spiritual enslavement to idolatry, but it refers to the enslavement of Parai in Egypt. So when the Mishnah says maschil bignus u'mesayim b'shvach, we have a very interesting dispute what this means. From Rav's perspective, it's talking about the spiritual development of the Jewish people, from a state of idolatry to a state of enlightenment, of discovering the truth of the universe. And according to Shmuel, it's about the physical enslavement to Parai in Egypt and the subsequent emancipation. That's the machloikas between Rav and Shmuel. Shmuel holds that we're celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why are we speaking about other things? Why are you speaking about the Avodah Zarah of Terach, the Avodah Zarah of Avram Avinu? Rav holds, it seems, that the primary focus is not just the physical emancipation, but also spiritual emancipation. And that's why we celebrate it tonight, that we became his nation, that we became a divine people. So we start all the way from the beginning. Now, our Haggadah, of course, includes both opinions. Right after the Manishtana, we start off, Avadim hayinu lefarim b'Mitzrayim, v'yetzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham b'yad chazak uv'zirei nituya. But a few sections later in the Haggadah, we start off, Mitchila oivdei avodah zarah hayaviseinu, v'ashav kivana makam lavedasi. So we actually synthesize both opinions, Rav and Shmuel. And that's the idea that maschil bignus, you always begin with the gnus, that the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not that you're always in a good place. It means that redemption means that there's challenges, there's difficulties. I'm steeped in slavery or primitiveness, and from there the redemption happens. That's the re-experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Doesn't happen by ignoring the negativity. It's by understanding that in the beginning there is the gnus, and from there you develop into the shvach. So according to Rav, the gnus is avodah zarah, and the shvach is the emancipation of avodah zarah. And according to Shmuel, the gnus is avdus, enslavement, and the shvach is the liberation from enslavement. Vayetzeinu Hashem Elokeinu. Zog the Gemara, Amar lei Reb Nachman ledoru avdei. This is the night of Pesach, the night of the Seder. Reb Nachman had a slave, a servant, and his name was Doru. So the night of the Seder, Reb Nachman turns to his slave Doru and he says like this, Avda de mafik le mori lecherus. A slave that his master took him out from slavery to freedom. He emancipated him. V'yoyiv le kaspa v'dava. Then the master gives him silver and gives him gold. This is what Reb Nachman is asking his slave. A slave whose master emancipates him and gives him silver and gold. My boy le. What should this slave tell the master? Amar le, Daru tells his master, Reb Nachman, Boyili duye ule shabuche. This slave ought to thank, to express gratitude and praise to the master. Amar le, Reb Nachman says, Patarton miloymar manishtano. You have exempted us from saying manishtana. Pesach v'yamar. Instead, Reb Nachman begins the Seder and starts with Avodim hayinu lefarim b'Mitzrayim. Now, this is a fascinating story. What happened here? What was Reb Nachman's point? Why doesn't he have to say the manishtana? What's the connection? So it's interesting that if you look in the Rashbam, right? He says Pesach v'amar la'achar she'elas haben hischilaimer Avodim hayinu. The Rashbam didn't have in his Gemara the words Patartin Malayma Manishtana. It just Pesach v'amar Avodim hayinu, meaning he asked the slave the question, his slave answered, the child asked Manishtana, and then Reb Nachman said Avodim hayinu. V'goymer Haggadah b'shvach v'hidah. And he continued and completed the Haggadah with a sense of praise and gratitude. Keloymar, Kein asalana Kadosh Baruch Hu sheyinu avodim v'tzianu misham. Reb Nachman wanted to illustrate for himself and his family why we're celebrating. So basically, we learn from here that Reb Nachman, he gave new life to his Seder. The children of the Einiklach are sitting around. Reb Nachman didn't just say we're doing the Haggadah. He had a conversation with Daru. Daru responded. Reb Nachman said, you hear what's going on. So now, this is our story. We were slaves. The master emancipated us, plus gave us silver and gold because the Jewish people went out with enormous wealth. And now we can appreciate the Haggadah. So that's how the Rashbam understands the story. Reb Nachman was really trying to bring it home, to illustrate the point for himself and I guess for his family or for the guests, that you should be able to experience the Seder in a much more meaningful and relevant and profound way, which I guess is a very profound lesson that you sometimes have to improvise. You have to create conversation and illustrations that make it real and authentic for the people living in that time, because Daru is a living slave right now and he could speak about it right now. Right? So imagine if you had at your Seder, if you're living 1865 in the South, right? 1865 in the South. I think Lincoln was assassinated on Pesach. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on Pesach. So you're living 1865 in the South and you turn to the slave and you say, what does it feel like to have been emancipated by President Lincoln? And the slave tells you, you say, okay, chavre, now avodim hayir lepareh b'Mitzrayim. That would be the equivalent in contemporary, I mean, not mamish contemporary, but closer to home than Reb Nachman's time. Really, he tried to bring it home, and that was the point of what Reb Nachman did with his slave Daru. The question is, according to the regular Girsa in the Gemara, it says, Patartun miloymar manishtana. So the Rashbam obviously deletes it because he says clearly that the child asks. So obviously he did not have that. That's why after Patartun, I don't know if you have it by you, but you see that there's some, the Rashbam basically is not Goydus, is not Goydus this. And we just learned before that you have to have questions and answers. And even if you don't have a child, your wife asks. And even yourself you have to ask. So why would Reb Nachman say that you don't have to ask the manishtana? That is why from the Rashbam you see clearly that he deletes these words. In other words, Reb Nachman just said Avadim Hayinu. And Reb Nachman did have to say the manishtana. And the reason the Gemara doesn't mention it is because it's obvious. That is one way of looking at it. The question is, according to the Gersa Patartim Eloi Manishtana, how are we supposed to understand this? So they bring in the back here in the Mesifta Gemara from the Sefer Lahoidus Nassan. So he says, this is how you have to understand the Gemara. That every year I want to experience a new dimension of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the Chachamim say, ask a question, basically saying that what I understood last year still was not the real thing. It was a very limited perception. And after everything, we still have the questions. And we have to go to a deeper layer. Amarti achakma v'hi rechoika mimeni. The more wisdom, the more distant it becomes. So he says, this is what happened with Reb Nachman. This is what happened with Reb Nachman. Reb Nachman said, if you go free, what do you have to do? So he said, Lu'eduyo l'shabuche, right? Haidaya is you thank once. Shvach, as we said, increases. It's like the dividends, the interest. Shvach peiris. In other words, it gets better and better because every generation is Yeshabach Masecha. So when the servant said, not only Le'eduya, but also L'shabuche, he revealed that he understands it's not enough to thank once for what happened by Yetzias Mitzrayim, but L'shabuche. It's endless, it's infinite. Each year there's a deeper praise, a deeper awareness. So Reb Nachman said, if so, we don't have to say Manishtana, because the whole point of Manishtana is to challenge us to go yet into a deeper layer of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But this servant already explained to us this very concept by the way he understood how you have to respond to the gift of liberty and emancipation. That's the Lahiris Nossen's explanation. That's why Reb Nachman did what he did. Zog the Gemara. Okay, this is a new Mishnah, so we'll stop here.
According to this, he meant.
According to this, he said you don't have to say Manishtana. You could just go straight to Avadim Hayinu. In other words, that the objective of Manishtana has been fulfilled. The objective of Manishtana is.
He said always that just say it anyway because that's what they were sacking.
But according to him, you didn't have to. It's not an intrinsic obligation. It's an obligation with a purpose. And once the purpose was met, you don't have to do it, according to this explanation. The Rashbam obviously disagrees. He takes it out. But according to this interpretation, you Pasha don't have to say the Manashtana because the Manashtana has a purpose. And we already did the purpose.
Is there maybe the entire Maggid is like this? As long as they fulfill the purpose, explain anything that happened and everything else. Why do you have to follow the canonical structure of the text?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let's say somebody can read the whole Haggadah, right? The kids don't know what's flying, or he could sit with them and actually explain. Right? Where did you do the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Obviously, the person who communicated in a way that they got it. Like a teacher with students, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but like in everything in Yiddishkeit, mitzvah, it says mitzvah b'loy kavan, it could go b'loy neshama. Mitzvah without kavan, it could be like a body without a soul. On the other hand, the text of the Haggadah is the text that Chazal chose to convey the story. So that's why we use that text, obviously, and the text has, tremendous symbolism and significance, yeah. But in other words, there's an objective here. The objective is not just reading words and screaming at everybody to stay in quiet. The objective is to communicate the story.
It's like if you want to be captivating, the experience should be captivating. You should use...
Right. Right. That's what Reb Nachman wanted. He obviously wanted to captivate the audience. I just want to share another interpretation in this Gemara, the story of Reb Nachman from the Malbim. There's a Haggadah of the Malbim, and in a footnote, after the Manashtana, the Malbim gives his interpretation of the story. And the Malbim asks a few questions. The first question he says is, why did Reb Nachman Bechlal have to ask Doru, his slave? It seems like Reb Nachman didn't know the answer, and he was asking his slave to explain to him what the feeling is. Like, why couldn't he understand this on his own? Isn't this like an obvious thing that if you're a slave and you're liberated, you're going to be very thankful, especially if you're given a great gift? That's number one. Question number two, the Malbim says, the metaphor of this slave going out of slavery is here to illustrate the Yetzias Mitzrayim from Galus. So he says his question should have been according to the actual story we're trying to bring out. The mashal should match the nimshal. What happened by Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim, they weren't only slaves, they were tortured, they were subjugated. By Yamaru as Chaim, they had a bitter life. So Reb Nachman should have said something else. He should have said, a slave who is oppressed and persecuted and subjugated and is forced to work hard, and then he sends him out of freedom. That's what he should have said. What does he say? He says, a slave that his master just sends him free and gives him silver and gold. He only asks him about the goodness that the master did, that he took him out from slavery to freedom. Why doesn't he mention a slave who was subjugated and subjected to slave labor, and then somebody took him out to freedom? That would have matched the story much better. Question number three. The obvious question. How does the answer of the slave exempt you from asking Manashtana? So the Malbim answers as follows. He says the point of the Manashtana is that even before you tell the story, you should already get emotionally excited, because the Manashtana mentions four things. Number one, matzah. Number two, maror. Number three, the dipping of the maror in the charosis. And number four, the misubin, being reclined. It says two represent slavery and two represent redemption. The matzah is lechem oini, it's the bread of poverty, the bread of slaves. The maror represents the bitterness of enslavement. Yeah. Dipping the maror in charosis is the transformation from bitterness to sweetness, because charosis is sweet, which represents redemption. And of course, reclining represents emancipation, cherus, liberation. So the four questions, just mentioning them, represent the vivid illustration of the transformation that the Jewish people went through, which allows a person to get excited immediately. In other words, you have the matzah in front of you, you have the maror in front of you, you have the charosis in front of you, you're reclining, so you already have a physical manifestation and illustration of the great transformation that Yetzias Mitzrayim represents, which will allow the Seder to be much more passionate. Because if not, the Malbim says, you have to wait till the end of the story, and when you hear the whole story, you get excited. That's basically the structure of Manishtana, and he explains that's why we don't ask about the 4 cups of wine. Why don't we say Manishtana that we drink 4 cups of wine? We never drink 4 cups of wine. And he says, because 4 cups of wine is already a detail in the celebration of Yetzias Mitzrayim. How do you celebrate? You celebrate with 4 cups of wine because of the 4 terms of Gula, V'Yitzesi, V'Tzalta, V'Galti, V'Lakachti. But the 4 questions focus on the transformation from slavery to liberation, and that's represented by the matzah and the maror, and then the charoisis and the mesubin. So the Malbim says, according to this, we'll understand this. If the whole point of asking Manishtana, representing the changes of the night, is in order to emote emotionally and therefore express the gratitude and how grateful we are, so Reb Nachman asked his slave Doro a question. And here the Malbim has a moide de kechap. The Gemara says in Baba Kama Daf Tzadik Zayin that Reb Nachman once said that the food that you feed your slave is not worth what you get from him. Meaning the investment that you put into your slave is much more than what you get back from him, because basically his work is not worth the amount of money that you have to invest in order to take care of his room and board. So the Gemara says that's only Reb Nachman. You know why? Because he had a unique slave, the Merakid Beikuvi. Basically, Reb Nachman's servant Doru used to hang out at night in bars of wine, and he would make litzonis, he would dance and make jokes. Basically, as the Malbim says, this was a unique slave. This guy did whatever he wanted. Imagine, at night, that's what the Gemara says about Bakama. At night, he would hang out in bars and dance and make jokes and have lutzonas and make shows. Maybe he made a couple of dollars, I don't know. Basically, this slave was a unique slave. He had no issues. He had a wonderful life. He was supported by Reb Nachman. He had a place to live. He got everything he needed, and he did whatever he wanted. That was the uniqueness of Reb Nachman's slave. The only difference between him and a free person was simply that he was owed by Reb Nachman. He was owned by Reb Nachman. In terms of his day-to-day life, this guy had no responsibility. He was frivolous. He did whatever he wanted. The only thing is, he belonged to Reb Nachman. So Reb Nachman asks him a question. He says, a slave like you, who doesn't suffer, who doesn't have to work hard, who can stay up all night, who has no issues at all, but a person like you, if you would be liberated, and you're not coming out of a life which is torturous and difficult, it's just, you don't own yourself, you're not independent, you're not autonomous. A person like you, if your master would free you and give you silver and gold, would you feel the need? What would be your response? My boy, what would be your response? That's what he wanted to know. And he wanted to ask this from his slave because he wanted to have somebody who experiences it, rather than Reb Nachman himself, who would just evaluate it and estimate it. So he didn't come to a slave who has a hard life. And that's why he didn't ask him about a slave who suffered terrible, terrible subjugation and oppression. That's not what his question was. He didn't want to ask about a situation that's similar to Golus Mitzrayim. He wanted to know something else. What happens if somebody did not suffer under his master? He actually had a very, very good life, maybe a better life than a lot of free people. But for being liberated from enslavement itself, just from nobody owns you, is that sufficient to trigger a tremendous sense of gratitude? And what did the slave tell him? Absolutely. Just for going out to freedom, for becoming my own person, I have to be thankful and I have to be mishabeach. And as we said, what's shvach? I'm adding this. The Malbim is Lashon. The Malbim explains, Dor l'dor yishabach ma'asach is not just praise. Shvach means it gets better and better and better. Like a shvach peris, the interest increases. The moment Reb Nachman heard this is, now you don't need Manishtana. The whole point of Manishtana is to teach and illustrate the shinuyim, the transformation. The fact that from poverty and bitterness, our lives have been transformed into liberation, and that transformation from one extreme to another extreme will give the person the feeling of gratitude. But according to the slave's response, just telling the story, Avodim ayinu l'fare b'mitzrayim v'yetzienu Hashem Elokeinu, the very knowledge that we were slaves, we were subjugated, we didn't have the responsibility for our own lives, we didn't have autonomy, we didn't have independence, we were owned by others, and we went out free, even without the memory of how bad it was and how terrible it was and how much oppression there was, and that we came out of that. Just the knowledge, Avodim ayinu v'yetzienu, is enough to trigger the joy and to give the gratitude and the praise from the depth of our heart. And therefore Reb Nachman says, Patartan miloymar manishtana upasach v'amar avodim hayinu. This is the Malbim's explanation in the Gemara. Okay, we're up to Pesachim Daf Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph on the bottom. The second line from the bottom, the new Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to actually quote. This Mishnah is actually a Mishnah that is well known because almost the entire Mishnah, its text went into the Haggadah. And this Mishnah is going to take us into a whole major sugya that's going to continue about Hallel. Who composed Hallel? When was it composed? Why was it composed? And a whole sugya about the word Hallelujah, which is going to bring us into a whole few pages of Haggadah. So let's see the Mishnah. You see Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph on the bottom, second to the last line. Rabban Gamliel Hoya Oimer. Rabban Gamliel used to say, thank you very much. Thank you. Rabban Gamliel Hayomer Kol Shaloi Amar Shloish Dvarim Elu BePesach Loyatzi Yedei Chivasar. Anybody who did not say these three things on Pesach, and I should right away quote the Rashbam, who says Shloish Dvarim Halalu Shaloi Pirish Taimon. Rabban Gamliel doesn't mean he who just didn't say these three words. He's not satisfied with just saying these three words. Whoever didn't say means whoever didn't explain these three things. Kol mi shaloi amar doesn't mean if you didn't say these three words that he's going to tell you, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. He means kol mi shaloi amar, you didn't explain these three things. You didn't explain the reason behind these three things. You didn't explain the theme of these three things. B'Pesach on Pesach liyotzi yedei chivasa, you did not fulfill your obligation. Ve'eluhein, what are these three things that you have to explain? Number one is Pesach. The carbon, the sacrifice that was brought, that we call the sacrifice of Pesach, the Passover offering. Number two is matzah. You have to explain the matzah. And number three, umara, you have to explain the maror. This was Rabban Gamliel's chiddush. A major component of the Seder must be explaining the background, the theme, the reason for these three items, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Now, when Rabbi Gamliel says you didn't fulfill the mitzvah, which mitzvah is he referring to? It says, which mitzvah is he referring to? One perspective, what do you think? Which mitzvah? Which mitzvah didn't you? It says, which mitzvah? Which mitzvah did I not fulfill if I didn't explain the meaning of Pesach, Matzah, Maror? So one perspective would be, I think probably our initial thought would be, the mitzvah of saying the Haggadah, the mitzvah of telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. I didn't fulfill the mitzvah of the night. What's the mitzvah of the night? Ve'igada televincha, you should tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim to yourself, to your family, to your child, etc. And you didn't fulfill this mitzvah. Why? Because a major part, or at least an integral part of the mitzvah is to explain the Karban Pesach, to explain matzah, and to explain maror. The story of Yetzias Mitzrayim must include this. This you see clearly from the Rambam in Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, because the Rambam brings the halacha of Rabban Gamliel when he discusses the halachas of telling the story. When he says you have to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, he includes this statement of Rabban Gamliel, and he finishes off that all this is called the Haggadah. In other words, saying this is part of the Haggadah, and it's an integral part of the Haggadah. This is one way of understanding Rabban Gamliel's words, This is the shita of the Meiri, and the Raven, and the Rashbats, and other Rishonim who hold that's what Reb Gamliel means, Lo Yotzei Yedei Chevosai of Metzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of Sippur, telling the story of the Exodus of Egypt. However, there is another interpretation. And the other interpretation is, Reb Gamliel is talking about which mitzvah? The mitzvah of Pesach Matzah Maror. You don't this is very interesting. You don't fulfill the mitzvah of eating the Karban Pesach, of eating matzah, and of eating maror if you don't explain the mitzvah, if you don't talk about the mitzvah. Usually, you fulfill a mitzvah, you fulfill the mitzvah. You did the mitzvah, you did the mitzvah. You heard shofar, you heard shofar. Here it's not enough. Lo yatzu yedei chevasei of these three things, of Pesach, matzah, maror. In other words, in addition to the mitzvah of eating it, there's another component to the mitzvah.
In the case of Korban Pesach, it's only a zecher, so you have to.
No, you might think if you eat the Korban Pesach, you did the mitzvah. Shem Gamliel says not enough. There's also a verbal part of the mitzvah. There's the of course Pesach will be now. We don't have the mitzvah of Pesach. Today it would apply to matzah and maror.
But not to.
We don't have the korban. We don't have the mitzvah. We don't have the eating mitzvah either. We only have the words. Yeah. In other words, part of the mitzvah is there's a verbal component of the mitzvah. What's the verbal component? You have to explain the mitzvah and explain the reason for the mitzvah. This is another way of learning the Mishnah. What he means, lo yatsa yedei chevasei. According to this shitta, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't need this. The story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, you could just say we went out of Mitzrayim and you fulfill the mitzvah. Of course, if you elaborate, it's much greater. Right? We say kol hamar b'lesaper b'yitzias mitzrayim harezim meshubach. It's praiseworthy, but for the mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, you don't need the details of Pesach matzah maror. But you need it for the mitzvah of Pesach matzah maror. Now it's interesting, as you're saying today, we don't have the mitzvah of Pesach. So according to the second opinion, we shouldn't have to do the verbal accompaniment of Pesach. So we'll discuss that a little later. We'll see about saying it today. Will be discussed later in the Gemara. But a major thing we see, that's actually what's left over from the Pesach. According to the second opinion, when you say today we don't have the mitzvah of Pesach, it's an interesting thing because it's not that we don't have it. We actually do have it. We just have half of it. We have the part of the speech, not the part of the action. So there's a certain part of the Pesach that we do have. Now, it's not really, we don't have the mitzvah of Pesach. The mitzvah of Pesach is to eat it and to explain it. We only have the explanation. But the point is that there is a part of the mitzvah that existed during the time of the Beis HaMikdash that we still have today. And that is speaking about the Korban Pesach, because that was part of the mitzvah. Even though today it's not a mitzvah anymore, min ha-Torah, because we don't have the Pesach, but there's a part of the mitzvah that remained intact from the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Another interesting question is, does the Reb Gamliel mean it literally? Lo yotzi yedei chevasei. Meaning, if I go through the Haggadah, the whole Haggadah, and I stop by Reb Gamliel, and I don't do that, did I not fulfill the mitzvah? It says, Lo yotzi yedei chevasei. So some of the Rishonim say he doesn't mean Lo yotzi yedei chevasei, you didn't fulfill the obligation. He means Lo yotzi yedei chevasei karoi. You didn't do it right. In other words, you fulfilled your obligation on a minimal level, but you didn't fulfill your obligation in a maximum level. That's what the Ran says, the Ritva says. Lo yotzi yedei chevasei doesn't mean you didn't fulfill it at all, but it means it's not the way you should do it. Like a lot of mitzvahs, you can do it in an ideal way, and then you could be yotze. You were yotze, but lo yotzi yedei chevasei, you didn't fulfill it in an ideal way. However, the Rambam brings the words lo yotzi yedei chevasei and he doesn't explain it, which means he learns that it's literal. That if you don't follow what Reb Gamliel says, you actually did not fulfill your obligation. It could be, some have suggested, that the way of looking at it depends on how you learn Reb Gamliel. If you learn that the pshat of Reb Gamliel is lo yotzi yedei chevasei, you weren't mekayim Pesach matzah maror without explaining it, then it might be logical to assume that he doesn't mean you don't fulfill the obligation. He means you don't fulfill the obligation in an ideal way. Because it would be difficult to say that if you eat the Korban Pesach, you eat your matzah, you eat your maror, but you didn't explain it, you didn't fulfill the obligation. Rather, what he means is it's not the wholesome fulfillment of the obligation, but you actually fulfilled your obligation, you just didn't do it in the maximum way. But if you say that Reb Gamliel is talking about the mitzvah of Yitzipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, here you could say that if you don't speak about Pesach, Matzah, Maror, you actually did not fulfill your mitzvah. Why? Because the pasuk says, "V'gadat levincha b'yom hahu leimer ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim." Hashem took me out of Mitzrayim, as Rashi says there, ba'avur zeh, in order to fulfill the mitzvahs of Pesach, Matzah, Maror. So that was part of the objective of Yitzias Mitzrayim, to fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. So if you don't mention it, you're deleting a real integral component of the story, and then lo yotzei dechivase may mean that you really did not fulfill your obligation at all, not only in an ideal way. But according to this view, it would be fascinating that lo yotzei dechivase means you pasha did not fulfill the mitzvah. So it's two ways of interpreting it. Either it's a din in Sipu Yitzias Mitzrayim, or it's a din in Pesach Matzah Maror that you actually have to explain. Now, why would Rabbi Gamliel say that by these mitzvahs you have to explain the mitzvah and not just do the mitzvah? So as we will see, it becomes clear from the sources that he brings. And he starts explaining. Ve'elu hein. These are the three things you have to explain, Pesach Matzah Maror. And this is what you have to say. You have to say, and we, of course, this has become the text of the Haggadah. In fact, we actually begin, Rabbi Gamliel, Haya Omer, Rabbi Gamliel used to say, we quote Rabbi Gamliel, we don't just do what he said, but we even quote him as the source in the Haggadah. So you start explaining Pesach. What's Pesach? Pesach, why do you have to offer the Pesach and eat the Pesach? And the answer is, Al Shum Shepasach HaMokam Al Batei Avosenu B'Mitzrayim, because Hashem leaped over the homes of our forefathers in Egypt, when he struck the firstborn males of Egypt in the 10th and final devastating plague called Makas Pcheres. He struck the firstborn of Egypt, the males who were born first in Egypt, and he leaped over the Jewish homes. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Va'amartem, you should tell your children, Zevach Pesach Hu Hashem. This is a sacrifice of Pesach for Hashem, Asher Pasach. I'll quote the whole pasuk. Asher Pasach al Batei b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim b'nokpoyas Mitzrayim v'ezbatenu hitzel. He leaped over our homes when he plagued the Egyptians, and he rescued our homes and our families. So what does the pasuk tell us? This is a pasuk in Parshas Boy. When the pasuk says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, your children are going to tell you, Ma ha'avoida azois lachem, what is this avoida? Va'amartem, you should tell them, Zevach Pesach Hu Hashem, this is a carbon Pesach for Hashem. And why is it called Pesach? From the word leaping, Pesach, because he jumped over, he leaped over, he danced over the Jewish homes. What do we see from this pasuk? First of all, it's a major component of Yitzias Mitzrayim, but also there's a special mitzvah, Va'amartem Zevach Pesach Hu Hashem. So according to the second interpretation of Rabbi Gamliel that we just discussed, that it's a mitzvah in Pesach, we see it's not just a mitzvah to eat. It says, Va'amartem. You should say, Zevach Pesach Hu Hashem. So from here he learns that there's a mitzvah to explain verbally what the carbon Pesach is, not just to eat it. It doesn't say when you hear shofar and Rosh Hashanah, you should speak about the shofar. But by Pesach it says, Va'amartem Zevach Pesach Hu Hashem. You should speak about it and explain it. From here he learned that if you don't, you did not fulfill the mitzvah, or at least not fulfill the mitzvah ideally. That's when it comes to Pesach. When it comes to matzah,
Tosfos on the previous page on matzah.
Yeah, the previous page, the second to the last Tosfos, Va'amartem Zevach Pesachu, Pirush Ba'amira. Shetzorich loymar Pesach zeh shanu oichlin. You got to speak about it and say, Zevach Pesach, this Pesach that we're eating, we're doing it for this reason. V'iskash matzah u'maror lePesach. Matzah and maror have been compared to Pesach because the pasuk says you should eat the meat of the carbon Pesach al matzos u'marorim yechlu, together with matzah and maror, a combination. So matzah and maror are compared in the pasuk in Parshas Boy to Pesach. So from here we learn that when you eat matzah, you have to also explain the reason for matzah. And when you eat maror, you have to explain the reason for maror. That's what Tosfos is telling us here. Ve'iskash matzah maror lePesach, v'tzarich loymar nami matzah zu maror zeh. Just like you say Pesach zeh, Matzah zu, matzah is feminine, so he says zu. Morer is masculine, so he says zeh, not zu, because zeh is lashon zachar, masculine, and zu is lashon nekeva, feminine. Matzah is obviously feminine, Pesach is masculine, and morer is masculine. No, so the point is, even in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you had to explain. The difference, of course, was in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they said, Pesach zeh sha'anu oichlim al shumma. This Pesach that we're eating now, why did we eat it? And the answer is, Shepasach Hashem, because God leaped over the homes. Today we don't have a Korban Pesach, we only have a commemoration of the Korban Pesach in the form of the Zroya on the Kaira. So we say in the Haggadah, Pesach shahayu oichlem avoseinu bezman shebeis hamikdash hayakayim al shum ma. We insert those words. The next is matzah. You have to explain matzah. So matzah, this matzah that we eat, why do we eat it? Because our forefathers were liberated from Egypt. And as we say in the Haggadah, the dough didn't have time to ferment and become leaven until Hashem revealed himself and liberated the Jewish people. Shenemar, and we quote the pasuk again from Parshas Boy, the pasuk says, they baked the dough that they took out of Egypt, ugois matzos, into cakes of matzah. Ki loy chametz. It could not become leaven. Ki gershum mitzrayim, because they were expelled from Egypt. V'lo yachlu lismameya. They did not have a chance to procrastinate, to delay their departure. They were chased out of the country. V'gam tzeda lo yasu lahem. They also didn't make themselves other foods, and therefore they were in such a rush, so they had to throw the dough into the oven and not allow it to sit around and rise and become inflated and ferment, and hence we eat the matzah. And that's what we're explaining at the Seder. Morer, we explain. Morer zeh shanu oichlem al shum ma. I'm using again the text of the Haggadah. Al shum shemeru amitzim eschaya v'senim mitzrayim, because the Egyptians have embittered the lives of our forefathers in Egypt. And once again, shenemar, the pasuk says in Parshas Shmois, vayimareru eschayehem, the Egyptians made their lives bitter and agony, full of agony, b'avodah kasha, through hard labor, chaimer with chaimer is clay, or belevenim with bricks, and kol avodah basada, etc. All the hard slave labor that they forced them to do in the fields. This Reb Gamliel teaches us is how you explain the three mitzvahs, bringing the psukim for each one that give the rationale, the theme, the content, and the historical reason for eating these three staples of food. And this made it, of course, into our Haggadah. We say Pesach, and then matzah and morer, and we explain the reasons for each based on this statement of Rabban Gamliel, who used to say this. Gamliel Hayomer. Okay. An interesting ha'ara would be, we say, why do we eat the matzah? We eat the matzah because the Jews were liberated from Egypt. What's the connection? The connection is they were liberated, not just liberated, they were thrown out. The liberation came in haste, in great haste, and therefore they didn't have time, as he quotes the pasuk. What happens if they would have had time? Let's say the Egyptians would say, take your time, if you need a few days, if you need a week, pack your peklach, if you need 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It sounds like they would have allowed the dough to rise and become regular bread, like we eat challah, and then they would bake it. Right? That's what it sounds like. It sounds like the reason we eat matzah is they didn't have time. So simply, the reality was that they baked matzah. The obvious question on this is, the Mefarshim say, the mitzvah to eat matzah was a commandment that was given to them before they left Egypt. On Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Jewish people they should make a Seder on the night before they leave Egypt. And what should they eat by that Seder? They should eat the Korban Pesach, they should eat Emor, and they should eat matzah. Already a night before they were expelled, they were commanded to eat matzah already before the whole story. It seems like even if they would have had time, they still would have eaten matzah the night before. They already had to bake matzah Erev Pesach. It had nothing to do with leaving Egypt, which was only the next day, and they were expelled. In the middle of the night, Paro said, get out, get out, get out. And the next day they left. Vahi Betzim, midday, the next day. So then they were taka in a rush. But l'chayra, the mitzvah of eating matzah doesn't have to do with that. The mitzvah of eating matzah was a commandment that was given weeks before. And yet, the Haggadah doesn't say that. The Haggadah says, matzah zu shanu oichlem. Why are we eating matzah? I would say we're eating matzah because there's a mitzvah to eat matzah on the night of Pesach. Even the first Pesach, before they left Egypt, there was a mitzvah to eat matzah. Irrelevant if they were expelled from the country or not expelled from the country. But we see clearly Rabbi Gamliel didn't understand it that way. He understood that the matzah is eaten because of that.
So two batches of baking.
Exactly. So they basically had to bake twice. So a lot of the Rishonim say something very interesting. The Shibbolei Haleket, the Avud Raham, the Rid, the Abarbanel in his Zevach Pesach. What they taina is, interestingly, that that itself was the mitzvah. The reason they were given a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach was because of the future. It was the future that defined the mitzvah. The reason they were given a mitzvah to eat matzah is because it was a commemoration of the fact that they will be expelled and they won't have time to bake it into chametz to allow it to rise. And that's why they were given already a mitzvah the night before to eat matzah, because this would represent what the redemption is going to look like. Get out of here, and get out of here fast. So that means this is a mitzvah that was given for what would happen in the future. The mitzvah was already given before that because God knew how it's going to unfold. That's how some explain this, what would seem like quite an enigma, that this is the reason given for why we eat matzah.
The question makes the question how long that, I assume, the second batch lasted, because they didn't get them on right away.
The batch of matzah that they made when they left Egypt lasted till the middle of Iyar. And then when that was gone, they were starving, and then the manna started to come down. The manna started to come down Tezayin Iyar, the 16th day of Iyar. So for around a month, they had the matzah that they brought out of Egypt.
It says somewhere that I assume the second.
They had the charora. He says the charora, the flat bread that they took out of Egypt remained.
Had a taste of the man. Rashi brings that.
Yeah.
So that is probably the second batch then.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Yeah. Another interesting question is, let's say they would have not been thrown out of Egypt. They would have had all the time in the world. It sounds like they would have baked chametz. But isn't there a mitzvah not to have chametz for 7 days? It's the first day of Pesach.
Well, you only had 1 day.
So that's very interesting. That in the first year, the mitzvah was, there's no prohibition for 7 days. It was just the first day. And some say only the first night. So that way, they could have baked that day chametz, especially, even if you say the prohibition went for the first day, they can eat it already at night, what we would call the first night of Chol HaMoed. They can eat it that night, they can eat it the next day. So essentially that wasn't a problem, because the Isser Chametz, the first year, was only the first day of Pesach. Not today, not like today for 7 days of Pesach.
Before Kabbalah Satorah, there was no 7 day.
Before Kabbalah Satorah, the Isser Chametz was only the first day, or the first night. So they would be able to bake Chametz on the day of Pesach, right? Or the evening of Pesach, after Pesach, the Monsey, the afternoon of the first day, or Monsey the first day, and eat it for the next days. They didn't because they were rushed. And that's why we have 7 days of Pesach. So this is interesting. The reason we have 7 days of Pesach is because really they could have made chametz, but because they didn't make chametz because they were rushed out. So they ate matzah for the next 7 days, because they didn't have chametz. So therefore, we now have a prohibition of chametz. By them, it wasn't a prohibition, it was just a reality. They couldn't have chametz. And by us, it becomes a prohibition. That's a very interesting idea. There's a maimer from the Balatanya, L'Kutei Torah, Matzazu, and he explains that it really represents something very deep. By them, they didn't have to have a prohibition not to have chametz. In reality, they didn't have chametz. They couldn't have chametz because they were thrown out of Egypt. We could have chametz, but we have a mitzvah not to have chametz. So they didn't have chametz not because of the mitzvah, but because there was no opportunity for them to have chametz. It was like an essential reality. There was no chametz. There was no room for chametz because they were expelled from Egypt. The way we commemorate that is by actively not having chametz.
Moshe Rabbeinu told Pharaoh.
Yeah.
He wants to leave. How many days did he say?
Initially, Moshe told Paro they're going to leave for 3 days.
So how did they know how to bake for a month?
Oh, I think the Jews knew that they're not coming back. Paroi thought they're coming back, but nobody else did. I don't think the Jews thought they're going for 3 days. Maybe some did, but I'm sure they knew that once they're leaving, they're not coming back after all this. They went through 10 plagues to go for 3 days. Here you see how stubborn Paroi is. He didn't even let them for 3 days till the end. This was Paroi's... Paroi? I guess Paroi knew how Jews prepare. When Jews prepare for, you ever saw Jews go on vacation for 3 days? How much food they prepare? You ever see Jews go on an airplane from here to Israel? How much food they bring on the plane? They could sustain a nation for a month. We don't take chances anymore. Since that day, we don't take chances.
Pesach, they buy food enough for a year.
This is Gemara here, that you should bring food for a trip.
Yeah.
Gemara mentions that you should
Yeah.
travel like that.
It's Seder l'derech, yeah.
And if they were making so much matzah, they were making so much matzah that night, there wasn't, and probably took a little while, there was none of the dough lasted more than 18 minutes before they put it in the oven.
Yeah. It was such a rush to leave Mitzrayim.
I mean, if they were making dough and baking it, there must have been...
They had to right away throw it into the oven and bake it very fast, so there was no chance for it to become chametz. They would have allowed it and it would become chametz and they would eat it on the way, but they couldn't, so there was only matzah. So that's why the only thing they ate during that whole entire journey was matzah.
Each batch was only 18 minutes, they probably made more.
Maybe even less than 18 minutes. If you're in a rush, you can't allow it to rise. Your wife makes challah sometimes. How long does she leave it on the counter? A whole night sometimes, yeah. Or hours, yeah. But if you're in a huge rush, you're rushing out, you have to go somewhere, you take the dough, you hack it out in the oven. No? I mean, I don't know what you're thinking. Tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking that they didn't just bake matzah for 18 minutes. They probably baked for maybe 2 hours, 3 hours that night. So they mixed some dough together, and maybe they took half that dough and put it in the oven, and there's still half the dough still sitting there. So that dough would have risen.
Perhaps the sun or a furnace. I mean, or the oven. I mean, they had the ovens then, obviously. How they baked it, what's the heat, the source of heat? I don't know. Depends on the weather that day. It's spring, it could be a hot day in Egypt.
We're so careful now not to leave any of the dough out for more than 18 minutes. How were they? They were so careful not to leave.
No, that's the point. We have to be careful. The reason we're careful is because of the story that happened to them. They didn't have to be careful. They just did it that way. They did it naturally because they wanted to get out of this cursed place. You understand? Because they did it that way, so now we, who could do it in another way, we are careful. What happened by them as a story became a mitzvah for us. By them it wasn't a mitzvah, that's the point. By them it was just part of the reality of the nature. And because that was the reality, we commemorate that, and it becomes enshrined in our lives through a commandment, through a ritual, through a mitzvah. Now, it's interesting, the order is Pesach, Matzah, and Morer, right? Pesach, that's the order. Pesach, Matzah, Morer. Now, this order is an interesting order because in terms of history, the Morer, why do we eat the Morer? Because they embittered our lives. So that was really the first thing. Yeah. Then the next thing was they baked Matzah Erev Pesach to eat it at night. And then the last thing was the Korban Pesach, which they ate at night. And the Korban Pesach you're supposed to eat when you're satiated. So you eat it after the meal. You don't eat the Korban Pesach before the meal. So first you eat matzah, then you eat the Korban Pesach. So really, in terms of history, you had first the maror, the bitterness, then the matzah, and then the Pesach. Even though it says you should eat the Pesach with matzah and maror. So some want to say the reason Ram Gamliel does it in this way is because of the mitzvah. The mitzvah, it says you should eat Pesach, and eat Pesach with matzah and maror. So therefore he put it in this order of Pesach, matzah, maror, because that's the order in which the mitzvah is described in Chumash, even though historically the maror represents the bitterness, and and the matzah represents already the redemption, and Pesach represents the redemption, but that's why he does it in this order, because of the mitzvahs of the Torah. It could be. So even though you ate it after the matzah and the maror, but nonetheless, because the Torah mentions it, the Torah mentions first the carbon Pesach and then it says eat the matzah and the maror together, that's why he does it in this order. Also, Reb Gamliel came from the family of Hillel, and Hillel believed in the sandwich. We learned about the Koirach, they had to eat the Pesach with the matzah and maror. So it could be that's another reason why he says Pesach matzah maror. But I saw a very nice part from Reb Shia of Belz. The second Belz Eruv, Reb Shia of Belz, he says a very beautiful word about the order. Reb Shia of Belz in his Agad, the Belz Agad that they bring like this, he says, I don't understand Reb Gamliel's order. In Egypt, he says the order, as we said, was in the reverse. First was bitterness, right? First was bitterness, maror. He has Pesach matzah maror. He says really maror should be the first. First they were bitter. Then he says they actually, on the 10th of Nisan, they bought a sheep or the lamb for the carbon Pesach and they offered it by day. And then they had to bake matzah before they left Egypt. So that should have been the order. Maror, Pesach matzah. Or if you want to say they baked matzah before Pesach, so have maror matzah Pesach. So Reb Shila of Belz has a very nice vart. It's, I guess you could call it a Chassidish Torah. He says Reb Gamliel was very precise in his order, because there was a very big difference between Pesach, Matzah, Maror. When they bought the carbon Pesach, the objective was clear. This has to do with a miracle, a great miracle. We're buying a carbon Pesach. God told Moshe that take the lamb, slaughter it, take the blood, put it on your door, on the temple, and on the 2 doorposts. The night of Pesach, I'm going to come. I'm going to go through Egypt. I'm going to strike every firstborn in Egypt, and I'm going to leap. I'm going to see the blood, and I'll leap over your homes. It was very clear that the objective of Pesach is a wonderful experience that the Jewish people are going to have that's finally going to break the cruelty and the stubbornness of Parai and will emancipate and liberate the Jewish people forever. That's the Pesach. He says the matzah. When they were told to eat matzah, they didn't know what's going to happen the next day. They didn't know that they're eating matzah tonight because tomorrow they're going to be expelled and they're not going to have time to let the dough rise, and therefore already tonight they're being told to eat matzah. That they only saw as the story unfolded. They weren't told that tomorrow you're going to try to bake bread and you're going to want to leave the dough on your counters and the Egyptians are going to expel you, you're not going to have time. So when they baked matzah Erev Pesach, they had a mitzvah to bake matzah. They didn't see that it's connected to redemption. On the contrary, matzah is called lechem oini. It's the bread of poverty. Later they will see that it's all connected to redemption. By the carbon Pesach, initially it was presented as a sacrifice that will facilitate geula, redemption. Matzah, only later, the next day it was revealed that it's connected to redemption because the Egyptians expelled them, and that's why they were eating the matzah. So what about maror? Maror, at no point do you see the connection to redemption. The whole idea of maror is that it's bitter. It represents vayemareru es chaya v'seinu b'mitzrayim. So he says, that's what Reb Gamliel says, that the order in which you have to celebrate the Seder is Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Because this gives you a perspective how you have to look at all 3 things. He says essentially, every moment of their life and every moment of life is a preparation for redemption. The question is how much you see it. In Pesach, it represents those things which right away you say, wow, this is awesome. Matzah are those things which when it happens, you don't see that it's part of redemption. But tomorrow, you will see that this is part of redemption. And then there are those things like maror. When you see it, all you see is what feels as bitter and negative. But really, that is also a preparation for redemption. Really, the maror is chayav v'seinu b'mitzrayim, the bitterness that they had in Egypt was all a preparation for redemption. So therefore, Reb Gamliel reverses the order. He says the first thing is you have to say Pesach, which is that where you see geula immediately. Then from there you have to learn to say matzah, where you don't see geula immediately, but you will see geula. And then you go to the third level of Mara, that even those things which seem like the opposite of redemption, matzah doesn't seem like the opposite, but even those things that seem like the opposite of redemption, even this is really on a deeper level. Ultimately, the inner light and inner power will be revealed, and it will also be revealed as a prerequisite, as a catalyst for redemption. That's why he puts it in this order. Because the Mara has to come after the Matzah, and the Matzah has to come after the Pesach. He says this is basically the Seder of the Jew on all three levels, because in every person's life you have all three. You have things that look awesome right away. You have things that like, okay, let's see what happens. And then you have things like, no, I didn't ask for this. He says with all three you have to be able to appreciate that it's all a hachana for Geula. Rabbi Aaron, verstehst? Perspective. Okay, says Reb Gamliel weiter. And this would explain why Reb Gamliel was the one who said it, because Reb Gamliel was the one who was the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, who represented the dynasty of David HaMelech, Malchus Beis David. Reb Gamliel came from that dynasty of Hillel and of David HaMelech, which is the dynasty of redemption. So it would explain why Reb Gamliel would put it this way and put it in this order. He continues, the Mishnah continues, in every generation one should see himself as though he left Egypt. Shenemar, Pasuk says in Parshas Boivi, this parsha is talking about the Jews who will enter into Eretz Yisrael, those Jews who did not physically leave Egypt. And the Torah says that in that era, in the Holy Land, when they'll sit with their children, they should tell them the story, and they should say, Ba'avur ze asa Hashem, li, to me. What does this teach us? That in every generation, one should be able to experience this as a personal experience. On one level, this means because, like we say in the Haggadah, that the exodus of Egypt wasn't a one-time event. It rather inspired every single generation. On a spiritual level, it means, and it's all connected, that Geulas Mitzrayim wasn't a one-time event. It unleashed the force of redemption in every single generation. In other words, every experience of liberation throughout all of history is the Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim is not a one-time event. Every time you go out of your own shackles, psychological or emotional or spiritual, it's all from the fuel, the oxygen that was unleashed during Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Tana adds, after you tell the story, you finish telling the story, you have to say, Lefichach, therefore. What's Lefichach? Lefichach, since every generation has to re-experience this. So Lefichach, therefore. Anachnu chayavim, we are obligated. Lahaydus lahalel l'shabeach l'far l'raimim lahader l'varich la'alei u'lekalis. 9 languages, 9 terms were just used. Lahaydus, to thank, lahalel, to praise, l'shabeach, to laud, l'far, to glorify, l'raimim, to exalt, lahader, to beautify, l'varich, to bless, la'alei, to elevate, l'kalis, to acclaim. Okay. Jetzt weißt du, was meint. 9 terms. Lemi, to who, sha'asala v'seinu v'lanu, did to our fathers and us as kol anisamel, all of these miracles. Hoitziyanu, he has liberated us, he has taken us out, may avdus, from slavery, lechedes, to freedom. Mi yagoin, from mourning, l'simcha, to joy. May avel, from grief, liyamtiv, to good days. May afela, from darkness, l'or gadol, to a great light. Umishibud, from subjugation, l'geula, to redemption. V'noimar lefanav, hallelujah. And we should say in front of him, before him, hallelujah, praise God. So we have here 9 expressions. 9 expressions. The Gemara is soon going to say that the Tehillim, the Sefer Tehillim, employs 10 different terms for praise, and it seems like that's why we have 9. Together with Hallelujah, it's 10. That's what the Maharal says. That's why we have here 9. Together with Hallelujah is 10. The Vilna Gaon, and as Agadah says, that these 10 languages, the 9 plus Hallelujah, represent the 10 plagues. Because of the 10 plagues, we do lahoidis, lahalal, l'shabech. Each one corresponds to one of the makos. And halaluka, which represents halal, halaluka, because you go on to halal, represents makas pcheiris, the last one, the 10th one, because you only say halal when the redemption is complete. That's why Purim, we don't say halal. The Gemara says why? Maseches Megillah Daf Yudalet. One of the reasons is because akati avdid achashverosh anan. We're still servants of Achashverosh, so Purim, there's no halal. Chanukah, there was a complete liberation. But Purim, they were still under the dictatorship of Achashverosh, even though he became benevolent. So therefore you don't say halal. So that's why only by Makas Pcheiris do you have halaluka, which is number 10, which is a complete halal. What are the terms? May avdus l'cheiris, miyagan l'simcha, me'eva l'yamtiv, ma'feil l'argadl, me'shibud l'gula. We're just trying to add adjectives. What are all these terms? What do you think? So I saw two fascinating interpretations. One interpretation I saw from the Vilna Gaon. He has a Haggadah. I saw it in the back of the Masifta Gemara Kufta Zayin Amid Beis. He gives a beautiful interpretation. What are all these expressions? So he says as follows. Me avdus l'cheirus is, in Egypt they were slaves. He took us out from Egypt where we were slaves. L'cheirus to liberation. Okay, what's miyagoin l'simcha? He says later they come to the sea and they see the Egyptians behind them and the sea in front of them and they're stuck and they all tell Moshe, why did you take us out? There are not enough graves in Egypt that you had to take us out to kill us here? We told you, let's just go back and serve them. So they were preparing for their death, which is a state of yagoin. Yagoin is mourning. And then by Kriyas Yamsuf, he took them out. Miyagoin l'simcha. That's why he says, "May avdus l'cheirus miyagoin l'simcha." Az Yasher Moshe of Bnei Yisrael. There was a tremendous joy and ecstasy. They sang the Shira. Miriam sang the Shira, etc. What's Me'evel l'yamtif? A few weeks later, they create the golden calf. When they create the golden calf, the Chet HaEgel, and Moshe comes down, and he gives them a piece of his mind. It says, Vayis Ablu. They all went into Avelis. Me'evel l'yamtiv. Then came Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur Hashem forgave them, and he gave them the new luchas. So he transformed Evel of the Chet HaEgel into the Yomtiv of Yom Kippur, which is a Yomtiv. The Mishnah says, Lo hayu yomim tovim liYisrael, kachamisha asa ba v'chiyayim HaKippurim. It's the ultimate Yomtiv. So that's Me'evel l'yamtiv, Yom Kippur. Then he says, for 40 years they were stuck in a desert. The definition of a desert is, it's called Eretz Choshech, Eretz Tzia v'Tzalmavis, a place of darkness, the shadow of death. And then they came into Eretz Yisrael, is Me'afela, from the darkness of a barren desert to the great light of Eretz Yisrael. What's Mishibud L'Gula? He says in the time of the judges, they were enslaved and subjugated to the Philistines and other nations. And finally, in the times of David and Shlomo, Eretz Yisrael was united and they were taken out, Mishibud L'Gula. So essentially, this is a journey throughout history. Hitziyanu me'avdus l'cheiris is Yitzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf is Yagan l'Simcha, Chet HaEgel to Yom Kippur is Evel l'Yamtiv, Midbar to Eretz Yisrael is Afeil l'Ergadol, Shibud L'Gula is from the days of the judges where they were subjugated to the pagan nations around them to a place of redemption, and that's the Shvach at the end of the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, which also makes sense with the Halachas Kama V'Kama, where you go through Hitziyanim and Mitzrayim and you go all the way till Hichnesanu l'Eretz Yisrael, Levana Lanu was Beis HaBchira, L'Chapra Al-Kol HaVeneseinu, which happened in the days of David and Shlomo. I saw another Sefer, Gvul Binyamin, and he interprets it this way. He says that these languages, which are 5 languages, were actually instituted for all of the different exiles. Because Galus Mitzrayim is the Shoirish, it's the root of all the exiles, and Geulas Mitzrayim is the source for all the redemptions. So he says, Hitziyanu me'avdus l'cheiris is from the enslavement in Egypt to the liberation of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Miyagoin l'simcha is the next Galus. The Jews were exiled to Babylonia. We have the famous Kapitel Tehillim, Al Narois Bavel, Sham Yashavnu, Gam Bachinu. we sat and we wept. There was a tremendous yagain, a mourning for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the first one. So from yagain, he transformed us to simcha, because 70 years later, the Jewish people came back and built the second Beis HaMikdash. That's why the Pasuk says in Nehemiah that when they came back from exile, they made sukkahs. Vatihi hasimcha g'doyla ma'oid. That's why the Haggadah says, mi yagain l'simcha. Then was the Persian decree of Haman to annihilate all the Jewish people. And what does it say? B'chal makam b'chal medina medina shedvar hamelech v'dasim magia evel gadol la Yehudim. As a result of the decree of Haman, they went into Avelis. And when the Purim miracle happened, it became a Yom Tif. We call Purim Simcha v'sasayin mishta v'Yom Tif. So that's May Yagin l'Simcha is the Bayis Sheni, and May Eva l'Yom Tif is the miracle of Purim. Then, he says, came the story of Hanukkah. The Greek-Syrian Empire wanted to destroy Judaism, and the definition of Greece is afela, darkness. The way Chazal described Malchus Yavan is that Hechshicha Eine Yisrael, on the pasuk v'choshech al pnei Yisrael, Malchus Yavan darkened the eyes of the Jewish people. That's afela. And the Jewish people literally had to observe Yiddishkeit in the dark. You know the story about the dreidlach, how they were learning, and when the Greek soldiers would come, they were playing dreidlach. Everything had to be in the darkness, in cellars, in afela. What happens Chanukah? Or Gadol, a great light. And how do we celebrate Chanukah? Through light, the festival of lights, by lighting the menorah. So Me'afela, they were brought out La'or Gadol. And then he says, finally, you have Mishibud, the next Shibud, which was the Roman Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash, to the Geula, which is the ultimate Geula, the Geula Mitzvah Shlema, the ultimate Geula, which will be one that is wholesome without any Galus afterwards. So it actually goes through a journey of all of Jewish history. Avdas L'Cheres is Churban Bayis Rishon, and then you have what's the second one? Yagin L'Simcha is I'm sorry, Avdas L'Cheres is Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yagin L'Simcha is Churban Bayis Rishon and Binyan Bayis Sheni. Eva L'Yom Tov is Purim. Afel L'Gadol is Chanukah. After that, you have the Churban Bayis Sheni, and the Galus begins until the Geula through Mashiach, which is Mishibud L'Geula. That's what the Gvul Binyamin says. So it's two different interpretations: the Vilna Gaon versus the Gvul Binyamin. But you see here how the language of the Mishnah is so precise and meticulous in every aspect. It's not just, let's do another adjective, another adjective, another adjective. And therefore you finish, V'noimar lefanov, we say before him, Hallelujah. And what happens at this point? At this point you start saying Hallel, right? We finish Lefichach and we start saying Hallel. Ad heicha noaimer. How much of Hallel do you say before the meal? This is all before the meal. You say only the first chapter, You say also the second chapter, Of course, later you're going to wash, eat the meal, and at some point after benching, we're going to finish the Hallel. But when we do Hallel, we don't start from the beginning because we already did the first two chapters. We start from Loi Lanu because we already did the first two chapters before we drank the second cup of wine. Beis Shammai says you only do the first chapter and the rest you do at the end of the Seder. Now, why would they split the Hallel into two? This is an interesting thing. Usually you say Hallel, you don't split Hallel. Here, by the Seder, they dafka split Hallel into two.
I have another question, maybe even more fundamental. Because we're talking about Hashem and all the Nisim, why do we even need to say Hallel?
You mean, why do we say thank you?
Like no, I understand. I mean, I understand the concept, but we're the whole Haggadah is an expression. It's Yigadik to Lebincha, which is a Doraisa. But you're talking, you're giving Shevach to Hashem for all the Nisim that He made, for all the Makos, for all the. So it's greater than Hallel in a sense. So isn't Hallel like not superfluous, but is it unnecessary given that we're giving a whole Hallel?
Okay, so that's going to be the next sugi in Gemara. The next page is going to be why we say Hallel. Bechlal, what's this whole idea of Hallel? Who made it? We'll soon get to the details of Hallel. But why would you split up the Hallel? So the Rishonim say something very interesting. The Gemara says in Brachas Lamed Hey, Ein Oimrim Shira Ela Ala Yayin, which means we praise God over a cup of wine. So therefore, they wanted that every cup of wine, the night of the Seder, should have an element of praise. The first cup always has it because it's Kiddush. We make Kiddush, and we thank Hashem for the Yom Tif and for the day. The third cup we're going to bench. We're thanking for the food. The fourth cup is going to be after Hallel. But the second cup didn't have any praise, because the second cup comes after the Haggadah, where you told the story, but it wasn't about praise. It was just telling the whole story. So therefore they put in Hallel right before you drink the second cup. So the second cup should also have an element of praise. That's what the Mordechai brings, the Chaim brings, the Avud Raham brings. Now, if we would be saying the Hallel as a din kriyas Hallel, like you do on Yom Tif, then you don't separate, you don't make a break in the middle of the Hallel. But here the Hallel has a different quality, as we will see later. There's the Hallel the Hallel that we say as a mitzvah of reading Hallel, of saying Hallel like we do Yom Tif after Shemoneh Esrei. Here it's Medin Shir of praising God, and therefore you could take the break between the different parts of Hallel. What's the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? In Yerushalmi, in Masechta Pesachim, the Yerushalmi elaborates on the argument. Yerushalmi says that Beis Shammai told Beis Hillel, why would you say B'tseis Yisrael Mitzrayim at this point in the Haggadah? You didn't leave Egypt yet, because the Geula only started at midnight, when God struck the Egyptian firstborns and Parai begged them to leave. So therefore, Beis Shammai says, B'tseis Yisrael Mitzrayim doesn't belong here. But Seis Yisrael Mitzrayim belongs only later, because at this point they didn't leave Egypt yet. This is the beginning of the night. It will only happen at midnight. But by midnight, you don't wait to eat the matzah till midnight. So this is much before midnight. So therefore, Beis Shammai says, why are you saying the second chapter? You should stop by Eim Habanim Smecha Alaluka. Beis Hillel answered, and Beis Hillel said, I don't understand. Even if you wait till the morning to say Hallel, they still didn't leave Egypt. They only left Egypt in the afternoon. So even according to you, you say B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim later in the night, it's still not the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim was only the next afternoon. So even if you're going to wait with the Seder till the morning and say Hallel in the morning, it's still going to be the wrong time. So therefore Beis Hillel says, I don't know what you want. So Beis Shammai is arguing, do it as close as you can to midnight, right? You can't wait till midnight, because by midnight you have to be already done with your matzah, etc., carbon Pesach, but at least according to most opinions. But do it as close as possible to midnight. In other words, do it later. But Beis Hillel is saying, what does later help? An hour later is going to help me? It's still before Yetzias Mitzrayim. So therefore Beis Hillel says, just do it all in the beginning. Do B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, you can also do in the beginning. And you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait till later. Just say, you started the Hallel, get into the story of Geula, and then you'll continue Hallel later. You have to understand the svara of the Machloikas. One of the explanations is, I'll say very brief, that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel throughout the whole Shas have usually two. You see many of the arguments between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai represent two themes. Beis Shammai follows potential, and Beis Hillel follows actuality. Beis Shammai follows b'koyach, and Beis Hillel follows b'poyel. Classic example would be Chanukah. According to Beis Hillel, you light the first night 1 candle and you go up. According to Beis Shammai, you light the first night 8 candles and you go down. So the Gemara says, Keneged Yamim HaNechnasin, Keneged Yamim HaYotzin. What's the argument? Beis Shammai says that the first night of Chanukah includes all the 8 nights potentially. You're starting the Yom Tif. So tonight you start 8. Tomorrow night you only have 7 nights left. So you only do 7. The last night you have 1 night left. Nu and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says the first night in actuality you only have 1 night. So you do 1. Beis Shammai says you have 8 nights waiting. So you light 8. Tomorrow night you only have 7 nights waiting. What would be the logic? I mean, seems like it's semantics. 8 nights waiting, or tonight is the first night, so you light 1 candle. Tomorrow you have 2 nights. One is following actuality. What do I have? B'poil. B'poil I have 1 night is 1 candle. Tomorrow night I have 2 nights is 2 candles. The next night I have 3 is 3 candles. The last night is 8. Beis Shammai says no. It's better to look at the potential. Tonight, what do I have in store in potentiality? I already have 8. Tomorrow in potential I only have 7. One way of looking at it is, how did the miracle happen? According to many opinions, they only had oil for 1 night, right? According to one of the explanations of the Beis Yosef, the power of the oil was increased 8-fold, so only 1/8 of the oil burnt over the night. Usually the whole oil should have been depleted. But because its power was strengthened, it was increased, so only an eighth of the oil burnt. So therefore they had for 8 nights left, right? So that means, when did the miracle happen? The miracle happened the first night, because the same oil that had to burn in 1 night, it increased its power by 8-fold, so it could burn in 8 nights. So when did the miracle actually happen? B'koyach, in potential, it happened the first night. But when did you see it? You saw it only each night as it continued to burn. So if you look from a perspective of potential, when did it happen in potentiality? It happened all the first night. But it was invisible, it wasn't seen, because you only saw the burning 1 night. So Beis Hillel says you have to light 1 night. Beis Shammai says, no, tonight you light 8. Tomorrow night, you have a miracle left for 7 days, so 7. At the end of Mishnayos, there's a machlok between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. I don't know if you ever visited a beehive, but beehives, they create what's called honeycombs. You ever saw them? Chalois dvash. And the one who owns the beehive, at some point, he would usually put smoke in the beehive, because when there's smoke, bees get drunk and they fall asleep and they don't sting you. There was a huge fire in Notre Dame in Paris, and they have huge beehives, and all the beehives survived. They just got drunk, they fall asleep, and they're good. They're good. The smoke for them, they like the smoke. It's like vodka, it's like mashka. They fall asleep in this. So the question is, the Gemara asks over there, Chalas Dvash, at what point do the honeycombs become a definition of food that's susceptible to tumah? So Beis Shammai says, Meshayirasik, when you actually break up the beehive and you actually take away the honeycombs. And Beis Shammai, Meshayaharer, when you think of doing it, or another gear says Meshayacharcher, when you start putting smoke in. In other words, Beis Hillel looks at bepoil. Beis Shammai looks at bekoyach, potential. So another machlokes, when do fish, the dugim, there's also machlokes, when it's considered, when you consider it actually dead. So Beis Shammai says that, and it could be makabel tumah. So Beis Shammai, the moment you catch it in the net. Beis Hillel says, no, it has to die. Again, it's the same concept. You put it in the net, it's going to die, but it's not dead yet. But potentially, that's the way it's going. So Beis Shammai always looks at the bekoyach, and Beis Hillel looks at the bepoil. This argument you see throughout Shas. When you hire somebody for work, do you look at their potential, or do you look at the actuality? Yeah. If you want to take a bocher as a son-in-law, do you look at the potential, or do you look at actuality? You want to take somebody into your yeshiva, do you look at the bekoyach, or you look at the bepoil? It's 2 different perspectives. One is you actually look what's happening in actuality, and one is you have to see what the potential is. Beis Shammai is a very deep level. Beis Hillel speaks about what's visible, what's bepoil. Yeah, he saw the bekoyach. When Rabbi Yochanan met Rish Lakish, if he would have only seen bepoil, he would have dismissed him. He saw the potential. You know the story, Rish Lakish jumped into the Jordan River in order to engage him. Rabbi Yochanan looked like a woman because he didn't have a beard. Rish Lakish, the Gemara says, was a gangster. He saw Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan bathing in the Jordan River, and he jumped in. And he had tremendous power. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Chelach lo iraisa. This strength belongs to Torah. So Rish Lakish told Rabbi Yochanan, and your beauty belongs to women. So Rabbi Yochanan said, my sister is more beautiful than I am, and if you become a mensch, I'll ask my sister to marry you. And Kachav, Rish Lakish became the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan. So Gemara in Baba Metzia, Daf Pei Daled. So Rabbi Yochanan had to see the bekoyach, the potential of Rish Lakish. So Beis Shammai always looks at bekoyach, Beis Hillel looks at bepoil. If you look at the bepoil of Yitzias Mitzrayim, it was in the afternoon, the next day. So Beis Hillel tells Beis Shammai, what are you delaying B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim? Even if you do it in the morning, you still didn't reach the time. If you're looking at the bepoil is going to happen only tomorrow afternoon, but we can't say Hallel tomorrow afternoon. We have to do a Seder tonight. So therefore, we'll do B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim right away. That's Beis Hillel's shit because he follows the bepoil. And Bepoyel, even at midnight, is still not Yitzias Mitzrayim. Paro gave them permission to leave at midnight, but they only left tomorrow afternoon. At midnight, they had the power to leave, the potential, but having the ability to leave doesn't mean you left. We all know in life, Bepoyel is getting it done. But Beis Shammai, he follows B'koyach. Because he follows B'koyach, so therefore, the schus that they had in order to leave Egypt, it says, was because of the blood of Pesach. The blood of Pesach was the schus. So the moment they eat the carbon Pesach, they already have the B'koyach, the schus through which they had Yitzias Mitzrayim. So right after you eat the carbon Pesach, which by us is the Afikoyman, you could already say B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. That's the Svaras HaMachloikas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The halach is like Beis Hillel usually, so therefore we do the first 2 chapters. And then he says, V'chaisim begeula. And you complete with the bracha of redemption. After you say Lefichach and you say the chapters of Hallel, you complete with a bracha for redemption. What's this bracha? Argument. Reb Tarfon Noam, it's a very simple bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher galanu v'galus haveseinu b'Mitzrayim. That's it. There's no conclusion, there's no second baruch. Short brachas only have one baruch and no second baruch. Like Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher galanu v'mitzvayseinu v'tzivanu laniach tefillin. You don't do another baruch afterwards. Right? It's not like benching, where you'll do Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hazonos ha'olam, and you'll finish Baruch atah Hashem hazonos ha'kol. Shorter brachas only have one baruch. So he says that's what you do. Baruch atah Hashem, shegalanu galus haveseinu b'Mitzrayim. There's no ending. Rabbi Akiva says no. You say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher galanu v'galus haveseinu b'Mitzrayim. But then you add, and this is what we do in our text, Kein Hashem Elokeinu v'lekei haveseinu yageinu l'moedim l'regalim acherim abam l'gaseinu l'shalom. God should bring us to other Yomim Tovim, to other festivals that will come before us, that will come to us in peace. And he uses 2 words, Moyadim and Regalim. You know the difference. Moyadim means designated times. It refers to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Regalim refers to Pesach, Frivolous, and Sukkot, when the Jews were commanded to take their feet, their legs, and be oile leregel, take their feet and go up to the Beis HaMikdash. So we're saying Moyadim, we should have the Moyadim and Regalim. Smeichim bevinyan irecha, celebrating the building of the rebuilding of your city. V'sasim b'avodasecha, and rejoicing in your avodah. The Gra says Simcha is the beginning of the joy, Sasan is the completion of the joy. So there's the building of the city, and there's the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, which is the culmination of it. V'noichal sham min hazvachim u min hapsachim. Zvachim refers to the karbonos Chagiga and Shlomim. And that's why you say Zvachim before Psachim. Why? Taisus explains, because they used to bring Erev Pesach, the Chagiga, and they used to bring the carbon Pesach. And the Chagiga was eaten before the Pesach, because you had to eat the carbon Pesach when you were satiated, not when you were starving. So therefore, if there was a huge family, the carbon Pesach wasn't so big, everybody would have a little piece. So you had to give some meat before, so first you ate the Zvachim, then you ate the Psachim. That's why, according to many Minhagim, the Maril writes that Motzei Shabbos, like this year, you say V'noichal sham min hapsachim and min hazvachim, because the carbon Pesach overrides Shabbos. But the carbon Chagiga you can't do on Shabbos. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbos unless it's mamash an obligation. So therefore, but sorry, Shabbos, you have a noichal sham min hapsachim and hazvachim, because the carbon Chagiga you only bring the next day, Yom Tov. That's why the minig is, but at least by some text that you reverse it, and you finish. We say, what do we say? The blood will hit and be sprinkled on the wall of the altar for your desire. We'll thank you with a new song for our redemption. Ad, all the way till, ad means go till the end. Everybody knows the text. Baruch atah Hashem, Gal Yisrael. According to Rabbi Akiva, there's a baruch at the end, not like Reb Tarfon. Baruch atah Hashem, Gal Yisrael, because the bracha is much longer. Because you're not just discussing Yetzias Mitzrayim, you're asking for the future Geula, and therefore you have an ending, and that's the halacha like Rabbi Akiva, Baruch atah Hashem, Gal Yisrael, and that's why you say Al Geula Seinu, V'al B'dus Nafshenu. Geula refers to Mashiach. B'dus Nafshenu refers to Yetzias Mitzrayim. So and it says that before the end of the bracha, right before has to be me'ein hapsicha. Since you started off with Yitzias Mitzrayim, so you end off with B'dus Nafshenu, which is Yitzias Mitzrayim, and then you say Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. Okay. We'll continue Be'ezer Hashem tomorrow. And basically, in a few lines, the Gemara is going to finish its discussion of Pesach and go off to a huge discussion on other topics, primarily the concept of Hallel, as we will see in the continuation of the Gemara. Everybody have a wonderful day.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.